So there's a week to go in the summer transfer window, and Middlesbrough are not done yet. Kieran Scott and Kim Helberg have both said that they're going to be going with an aggressive approach in this final week of the window, which means that there could be some more incomings and some more outgoings. So who's the best person to get on the channel to chat about this? Of course, it is Chris from Boropolis, the go-to man for Middlesbrough transfers. How are you doing, Chris?
Yeah, really well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to chat about all of the excitement of the final week of the transfer window. And as you say, plenty of business still to be done, both in and out. So yeah, loads to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, Chris and his co-host Nathan are possibly the busiest men on Teesside at around this time of year, so we're really thankful for him jumping on the channel to have a chat about Middlesbrough's transfers, the deals that have been done, the deals that are potentially still to be done in the next few days. But to start off with, Chris, what have you made of Middlesbrough's transfer window so far?
Yeah, like most, I've been massively, massively impressed with all of the business really that Boro have been able to do this summer. I think in terms of the age profiles of a lot of the signings and just really that Boro have been able to get their number one targets in almost every position. I think a lot of the discussion off the back of last season that there was two key areas really where Boro wanted to improve, and I think a lot of supporters were keen to see Middlesbrough improve as well. And that was obviously up front. And I think with the addition of Will Lancashire, I know that there was untold amount of competition. I know obviously Kieran Scott's spoken about it, but very early on this summer when it was mentioned to myself and Nathan, we spoke about it and said, if Boro could get that done, it would be a real marquee statement of intent, whatever you want to call it. So to get that one done so early and ahead of the competition, and as I say, with Radek Vitek coming in as well to be Boro's number one, another huge deal. Again, one that when it was mentioned initially to myself and Nathan, it almost felt a little bit unachievable, unrealistic, dare I say, but Boro have been able to get both players and a whole host of other ones. And I think just crucially, as I say, age range, people with vast amounts of championship experience, but also age profiles that are, Boro can develop them. Boro can, in terms of, I know people hate it sometimes hearing the word, but in terms of Boro's model, they've been able to recoup funds over the years and really invest heavily this summer into ambitious young footballers that are hopefully going to be brilliant now, but also grow in themselves and grow with the club. And obviously they're, if you want to talk about it in a business sense, fantastic assets in terms of resale value and all of the deals that Boro have been able to work this summer. It's been really impressive.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and of course, last season it was a decent season. Of course, we made it to the playoff final, so you can't turn your nose up at it too much. But there was some obvious frailties within the team. We've mentioned about Will Lancashire and the our inability to put the ball in the back of the net. There was also some criticism of Sol Bryn between the sticks and a couple of high-profile mistakes, notably in the playoff final as well. So, from your point of view, Chris, I know it's very early in the season, just a couple of games in, but do you feel like Middlesbrough have done a good job of trying to address those sort of frailties from last season?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I touched on Lancashire and Vitek, but I mean, there was the major job of replacing Hayden Hackney, who was the Championship Player of the Season last year. Like that was never going to be an easy task, and especially when you think of the financial deal that Middlesbrough were able to do with Everton. I don't think anyone was kind of under any impression that the Borough were going to be able to go and spend the whole fee that they got for Hayden Hackney on replacing him, or find a player as as far in his footballing career and as advanced and as good as Hayden Hackney, to be bluntly honest, really. This summer they were always going to have to be a little bit creative, but as I say, being able to bring in the likes of Sebastian Berhalter again, very early on this summer, it was made apparent to me that he was going to be Boro's number one central midfield target, and they were able to get him. And I think obviously the goalkeeper and the striker were the main ones, but even areas like as recent as today, Boro have brought in Sam Byram. And for me, I look at last season and I think of the period where Callum Britton was out injured, and we obviously had a good deputy in Alan Brown, who had that good spell at right back. But just bulking out the squad and giving Kim Hellberg a lot of options and opportunity to change things in games and hopefully, really not only be creative with his team selections and the way he wants to play, but just have the confidence to look at the bench and not be afraid to make changes. I think one of the big things that a lot of podcasters and supporters will have spoken about last season was, in the end, it felt like Kim Hellberg only trusted 12 or 13 players, really. There was their 11 that he would go with most weeks and probably one or two subs. And that was, I think the playoff final was probably the real obvious example of that, to be honest. So the likes of Carl Joseph coming in, I don't think, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful at all here, but I don't think Middlesbrough fans would have been, jumping with joy. He wasn't the marquee signing that Will Lancashire was, but just having a profile like him to come on, to play on a Tuesday night after a really difficult game on a Saturday, it's been a massive, massive improvement in terms of the squad depth and all of the options that Kim Hellberg now has to use.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned it just there. I mean, such as the fast-moving nature of the transfer window that just mere seconds before I was about to hit record on this session here, Sam Byram was announced as a new signing for Middlesbrough. So he's arrived on a free transfer. He was let go from Leeds at the end of last season. It doesn't say on the website how long the contract is. I imagine 1 year, possibly two, a stretch. I imagine it'll be taken on a sort of year-by-year kind of basis. But it might not be the most eye-catching signing in the world, Chris, but an important one nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to know, it is a free agent signing, but even on Leeds United's official retain list at the back end of last season, it was something that was, not by any means cut and dried. He wasn't released. There was still discussions ongoing at the back end of last season as to whether they were going to keep hold of him. Obviously, last season he didn't play a great deal of football, but was available for a large majority of the season. And obviously in the season that Leeds were promoted from the Championship was a really crucial part of that. I think what I like about this signing most is he is, of course, as you mentioned, cover for Callum Britton, but he's very adverse to playing both right and left back. So for the conversations around Max Austin settling in and getting to grips with the Championship and Neto Borges, who's obviously comfortable playing centre back as well, he offers not only protection on one side but the other. And for me, he feels like the type of signing that, again, it's not going to get people jumping out their seats or anything like that. But I think in terms of when you look at Borough's stats at the end of the season, he probably might have played, 25, 30 games, potentially even coming out and coming on and closing out games, the Borough in front. And then obviously when the games come thick and fast, there's always going to be injuries and suspensions, which, you need a squad for. And as I mentioned earlier, Borough didn't have that last season, but with additions like him, they're definitely going to be more well prepared this year.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I do remember with Byram as well. He was a big part of that Leeds side who got promoted a couple of seasons back. There was a lot of star players in that team, but he kept his place in that side. Particularly, if I remember rightly, left back was a bit of a trouble position for Leeds at the time, and Byram was a really safe pair of hands for them in that promotion-winning campaign. So that's a really good signing from Middlesbrough to bring him in to play left back as cover, also right back as cover as well. So yeah, really interesting one. So I'm sure there's going to be a few more signings coming up, Chris. So we've got a week left of the summer transfer window. A lot of deals already done. I think Byron was number 9 of the summer so far, but I think there's going to be a few more. So what positions do you understand Middlesbrough are going to be targeting in this final week of the summer?
I think it's widely known, really, that Borough are looking to add another centre midfielder. That's definitely one priority. And then, from my understanding, and obviously Kieran Scott did mention it on BBC Tees the other night, they're still very open to using the Premier League loan market as well. And I think that, from my gut feeling, would possibly be to add a wide attacker. Obviously, with the transfer window, like you say, things can change. There's still speculation regarding David Strelets and his future. So you'd imagine that might have a knock-on effect at the top end of the pitch. But in terms of priorities, As I mentioned, centre midfield is definitely one option. I think we may see, well, definitely one addition there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another centre midfielder arrive potentially. And then, as I say, on the flanks, right or left, I think Boro are hoping to and keen to add a little bit of pace and dynamism on the sides.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One player who's been linked in the last couple of days is Jack Clarke from Ipswich. So you mentioned about Premier League loans getting a little bit of stardust coming down from the Premier League. I mean, they can be really important signings to do, but of course Jack Clarke scored the winning goal for Ipswich against Sunderland on the opening weekend of the Premier League season. So is that a deal that you could see happening, Chris? It feels like a bit of a long shot to me.
Yeah, it was funny the timing of that goal, wasn't it? Because Jack Clarke is a player that Boro have been really keen on going back to the January transfer window. Understandably, at that point, Ipswich and Boro were competing for automatic promotions, so Ipswich weren't keen to let him go, which is completely fair enough, you'd have to say. But with all of the additions that they've made, I think there was a little bit of optimism that he may be available. Obviously, he's a Northeast lad, so there is that appeal to him in terms of moving back closer to home as well. Obviously, off the back of yesterday and even prior to that goal, I think probably that goal's made it even more difficult. But my understanding was that it was one that it's probably always going to be a bit of a long shot. Gary O'Neill is a big fan of Jack Clarke, and I think obviously the change in manager will have affected things as well for Ipswich in the summer. Last season, Jack Clarke was really deemed a finisher, to be honest, by Kieran McKenna. He didn't tend to start games. Jayden Philogene was his go-to guy off the left. And I think this summer there was very much an expectation from Jayden Philogene's side that he was potentially going to move on. I know Fabrizio Romano had made it quite clear that him and his representatives were seeking a move elsewhere potentially, but that seems to have changed, and it looks like he might stay at Ipswich now. So with other additions that they've made, Dyson Maeda from Celtic, he looked like, or looks to be, the sort of starting left winger for them, and obviously Philogene's still there. They've got an embarrassment of riches across the front line, like they did in the Championship last season, really. So I wouldn't completely say there's no chance, but I think it's looking difficult now. Obviously, it would be an excellent signing, an excellent addition for Middlesbrough if they could find a way to get that done. Potentially, obviously, Ipswich may add more bodies, and that might change the Clarke situation.
Hmm. Definitely one to watch then. And so you mentioned about a couple of different positions that we're going to be hopefully recruiting for in the next few days. So have there been any other names mentioned, Chris, of potential targets that Middlesbrough could be looking at?
There has been a couple. I think with the Mikey Moore links, that was a player that Boro were again really keen on. I think with Tottenham's business, it looks like he has been kept around at the moment, just until they get the likes of Savino and Marmoush over the line. It has obviously been, unfortunately for Boro's sake, heavily rumoured that he is going to move on to a German club on loan. I think from my understanding, that is very much through the players' representatives. Mikey Moore would have been open to coming to Boro for a season. I think it would have been a really good loan move if they could have done that. But yeah, I think once they get those two over the line, it might be Germany where Moore heads. In terms of centre midfield, there's obviously been links earlier this summer to Oliver Skipp. As of this morning, actually, my understanding is that there's no interest there at all from Middlesbrough. So there is centre midfielders that Boro are working on. There hasn't been those names mentioned actually publicly, as far as I'm aware yet. But there is definitely deals that are being worked on for centre midfielders. Another winger actually on that topic, Steffi Mavididi from Leicester City, another one that was linked, I think, by Alan Nixon yesterday in the Jack Clarke piece that he did. Again, from my understanding, like Oliver Skipp, Steffi Mavididi is not a player that Boro are going to be pursuing between now and the end of the transfer window. So yeah, there's a few that definitely won't be happening in terms of others. As I say, that there's definitely players being worked on At the moment, they haven't quite made it out into the media just yet.
Definitely. That's often the way, isn't it? Particularly at this stage of the summer when you are looking at potential loan deals and stuff, it can be a knock-on effect to a signing that's made by a Premier League club or even just getting into the final days. And often these agreed deals just come from absolutely nowhere with 24 or 48 hours to go. So I think I'd say to Middlesbrough fans, don't be too concerned at the lack of names in the ether at the moment. I think it's these things can often come around at the last minute, and I guess Middlesbrough are quite well stocked anyway, based on what we've done so far. But I think there's also the potential that there could be a handful of outgoings at Middlesbrough as well. There's a few players who have an uncertain future at the club, and you mentioned him just before, David Strelec being probably the biggest name in that list. There was links with Getafe in La Liga. There was also links with PAOK in Greece with suggestions that he had agreed personal terms over a move. Now, Kieran Scott was on BBC Tees last week and he was asked about it live on air. I think this was mere minutes after the news had actually come out. And Kieran Scott said that he wasn't aware of any deal and nothing seems to have happened since. But what's your understanding of the David Strelec situation, Chris?
Yes, Strelec is an interesting one. I think off the back of Kieran Scott's interview on BBC Tees, obviously he was quite keen to say that, from his perspective, that there's been no club-to-club contact or anything like that yet. From my understanding, I do think that there is legs to the PAOK interest. I know there was Getafe as well mentioned. I think, again, from my understanding, that is slightly probably less than the PAOK interest. As of right now, at the time of recording, I don't believe there to be any direct contact between clubs. But I think, and me and Nathan spoke about this in our podcast at the weekend, you see now that there is, Fabrizio Romano will report a transfer and it'll be personal terms are already agreed. And there's people in the comments saying, well, there's not even been a bid made yet. I think the way that obviously transfers occur now, there probably is. It would be almost, dare I say, a little bit naive to think that these types of conversations don't happen before there has been bids made. If you even think about it just logically, really, it would certainly probably be a waste of time if a club, really fiercely negotiated a deal, finally agreed a price, and at that point didn't even know if the player was open to a move. Obviously, there is still very much a chance that David Strelec will still stay. And I'm not suggesting at all that, David Strelec, it's all agreed. But from my understanding, there's definite interest from PAOK. And, that is something probably more serious than the Getafe interest. So it could well be something that develops between now and the end of the window.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on because even though Kieran Scott said that he hadn't heard anything, I had replies in my comments and that sort of thing saying, oh well, that means that it's not happening then. But that's not necessarily the case just because Kieran Scott hadn't heard about it at that point. But also, not to put words in anyone's mouths, but there's always the possibility, of course, that there was a bit of bluffing sort of going on. If they don't necessarily know what's kind of going on, it doesn't mean that there's not necessarily legs in that deal in the next few days. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on David Strelec, particularly with Doncaster coming up in the cup. It'll be interesting to see whether he's involved in the match day squad or even against West Brom at the weekend. But in terms of other players who could potentially move on, Chris, Alex Bangura, he's one. So what do you think the situation is with him? It seems like his future is pretty much sealed as being away from Middlesbrough in some way, shape or form.
Yeah, it's a bizarre one with Bangura because I think a lot of eagle-eyed Boro supporters have already noticed that he's no longer on the club site. With Bangura, I think it's very much a case that if he can find himself a move, he is free to go. At the moment, obviously, he's still contracted. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it gets to deadline day and at some stage of the day there is the Boro post on socials to say Boro and Alex Bangura have agreed to mutually terminate his deal. He is someone that I think last season it really is a shame because we saw little bursts of Alex Bangura and what he could offer to Kim Hellberg in terms of what he wants from left backs. So it is a shame, but with his injury record, and I think with Alex Bangura, it might have become a case, his own trust in his body, really. It's become a situation where, as I say, I think he will absolutely be allowed to move on, and it's just a case of if he can find himself a move. If not, I'm sure there will be conversations taking place regarding if that deal can be terminated or something can be agreed that he's free to go and find himself a new club, and there won't necessarily be a fee involved. It's a similar situation to Senny Dieng, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. And quite similar as well to Mika Hamilton as well. There was reports earlier on in the summer that he would be allowed to leave Middlesbrough this summer. I think it was suggested that he would be allowed to go on trial at clubs to try and secure himself a move away. Now, I haven't seen anything really about this since in terms of whether he's secured a move or whether he's close. But do you have any update on Mika Hamilton, Chris?
Yeah, so I think it was the Scottish club that were mentioned. I believe it was St Mirren. I think that he had at least been training with. I don't know if there was a trial period, but yeah, as you say, again, someone that has been allowed to go and try and find himself a move. Another one that is no longer on Boro's website. For people that pay attention to that, I think a lot of people, funnily enough, were really concerned that there was no profile image of Strelets, which has now been added to the website. But yeah, with Hamilton, he's free to go, and I think it might be a slightly different one to Bangura because obviously he signed a relatively long deal when he joined from Manchester City. I think it was two summers ago now, perhaps three even, and he signed under Michael Carrick, wasn't it? So yeah, there may be a mutual agreement there, but like you've mentioned, I've not kind of had any updates at all on that situation. And I think from his social media activity, you can see he's been training alone, training with one-to-one fitness coaches and different things like that. So I think his Boro career is over now. And yeah, again, like Bangura, it wouldn't surprise me if there is an announcement just to say that both parties have come to an agreement and he's moved on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one other player that I wanted to ask you about is George Edmondson, because it seems like his Middlesbrough career could also be over. Of course, we're pretty well stocked in central defence now. Of course, you've got Adelson Malanda and Luke Ayling and Ashley Phillips, and you've got Alfie Jones coming back from injury. You've then got the likes of Jack Daly as well, who came through in pre-season and looks like a really promising young talent. But I haven't seen much in the papers or anything like that. But what's the situation? Sorry, with George Edmondson in these next few days, Chris? Do you think he could be someone who may potentially move on?
Yeah, I think he was probably amongst the same group as Kali Sen, Sonche Hansen, Senny Dieng, obviously Hamilton and Bangura. As I say, Edmondson's a slightly different one in that obviously he's a really good character for those that are following Boro on socials. They'll see his personality and his sense of humour. I think he's a player that's really, really well thought of by everyone at the club and his teammates as well. So that there's probably not as much of a push to kind of get him out in the sense of he's not the type of character that's going to be a bad egg. He will by all means train and do everything he can to offer something to the Boro squad and try and work his way back into the team. But I do think again he will be someone that if Boro receive an offer for him, they wouldn't stand in his way if he can get a move. There has, as you say, not been too much public sort of links in terms of clubs that he may exit to. There was one club mentioned to me a couple of weeks back. Leicester were apparently showing interest in Edmondson. I haven't had an update on that at all over the last couple of weeks, so I don't know if that was depending on. I know Suter, the centre half there, was potentially going to be joining Sheffield United. That doesn't look like it's going to be happening anymore. Wrexham had shown an interest, so potentially, if that happens between now and the end of the transfer window, Edmondson might be, the person to come in and replace John Suter there. But yeah, they are the only club that I'm aware of that have shown an interest. I'm sure there will be other ones because, I know he's fallen down the pecking order at Boro, but there is, part of his game that will absolutely be a good signing for someone, whether it be a League One club or a lower end Championship club. He's absolutely no stranger to sitting at the back and winning tackles and winning headers and just being a defend first type of centre half. So yeah, George Edmondson a little bit different to a few others, but as I say, I think if there is interest and that is firmed up, he would be allowed to leave. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, what about players who could potentially leave on loan, Chris? I'm thinking of people like Law McCabe and Abdoulaye Kante. So I know Kante obviously started the first league game of the season, but if we are looking for another central midfielder, do you think any of these players could potentially be heading out the door on loan, or do you think any of the other young players could be heading out on short-term deals as well?
Yeah, I think Law McCabe's the immediate one you think of there, isn't it? As you say, he's not really featured too heavily in pre-season. Obviously, he had that loan move at the beginning of last season to Plymouth, which didn't really quite work out. I think he's now reaching a stage of his Boro career where he's been involved in a number of pre-seasons and squads over the past couple of years, but has failed to really make a complete breakthrough. So I could definitely see that being something that Boro pursue, hopefully a loan move for Law McCabe to go and play some football. Again, Leicester were mentioned to me, but like Edmondson on that one, I haven't had an update at all on that, so I don't know if there is any interest still there. But yeah, definitely someone that could go out on loan. I think the interesting one with Kante would be, as I said a little bit earlier, I know Boro are still looking to strengthen in central midfield. And in terms of the midfield dynamic, obviously, Abdoulaye Kante is really only in terms of a midfield profile, I would call it like a defensive midfielder or a destroyer type. And if he was allowed to leave on loan, you would imagine that type of profile would hopefully be replaced. Now, if Boro had two midfielders, you do wonder where that would leave Kante. But of course, you also can look at the Kante situation and think, well, he did start the first game of the season. All of the noises that I've heard is that he has had a good pre-season and done extremely well to get himself back in the thinking. Obviously, was an unused substitute against Blackburn at the weekend. But as I say, I think Kante would be one of those that is probably depending on potential incomings. And yeah, I must admit, I'm a fan of Kante and what he can offer in the right sort of game state. I don't think most Boro fans, and I say this with the most respect, would be best pleased to see him week in, week out. Boro will hopefully add to the midfield, and they've got Morris, Berhalter, and McGree that can play slightly deeper. But Kante, as I say, if he was to stay around, he offers something that Boro don't currently have. Obviously, they may add something similar to that type of midfield profile. But yeah, if we do add another midfielder, then obviously that would certainly raise question marks around Kante's future.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and so there's a lot of balls in the air, I guess, with regards to the end of this transfer window. So, are you expecting it to be a busy week, Chris? Are you expecting it to be a lot of deals done, both incoming and outgoing?
I think, to be honest, in terms of from my understanding, as of this morning, that there is still a couple of deals that Boro are working on, and like you say, there a lot of the time, really, that there's plates spinning that are, things that, regardless of outgoings, Boro are going to look to do. But then with the likes of Strelets, with other players, one bid put on a table can quite quickly change things. So if an offer does come in and land from Pauk for Strelets, I'm sure Boro would be looking at that and thinking, well, if Strelets moves on, Tommy Conway's viewed as a winger by Kim Hellberg now, we probably need to add another centre forward. But as I've mentioned, there is definitely deals that, regardless of outgoings, a couple of things that Boro still want to do. So I think in this final week, I wouldn't be surprised at all if including Byram, there is possibly 2 or 3 more deals that might still happen. So yeah, you would imagine that there's probably going to be a couple of ins and a couple of outs. So yeah, plenty of business and hopefully some exciting additions and fingers crossed, maybe an X factor sort of Premier League loan that Kieran Scott touched on in that tease interview last week.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, if only there was a really popular social media account where we could keep track of all of these transfer incomings and outgoings, Chris, it would be a real real benefit to all of us if we could do so. But of course, we've got Boropolis, who are the absolute go-to place in terms of transfer dealings, the best place to keep across all of the deals to do with Middlesbrough, both incoming and outgoing. So I know that a lot of supporters will know about the X/Twitter account, Chris. But where else can Middlesbrough fans find you and the stuff that you're doing?
So on obviously social media, there is the Instagram account as well. So anything that goes on Twitter in terms of updates or new pieces of information that are out there, we would also share that on Instagram as well as some excellent graphics from our graphic designer Michael. We also have a YouTube channel. We haven't quite sort of penciled anything in yet, myself and Nathan, but we may look to do a transfer update video potentially closer at the back end of the week, depending on what business happens, and really discuss if any new developments have since come out, probably since we record this, because it wouldn't shock me at all if by the time this goes up, I don't know, maybe tonight or tomorrow, there's probably 2 other stories that'll be fresh and in the media. So yeah, YouTube as well, audio platforms, and as you say, X or Twitter, and then Threads as well, if people are using that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I'm sure everyone's very aware of the X and Twitter account, but I'd definitely recommend listening to the podcast and tuning into the YouTube channel as well, because particularly over the summer, it's been absolutely jam-packed with nearly all exclusive transfer insight from the Middlesbrough end. So a really, really good listen/watch. So if you haven't already tuned into that, then I'd certainly recommend doing so in this final week of the window. But Chris, thank you very much for coming on and joining me. It's been great to chat to you and to get a bit of an insight on what we hope will be a busy final week of the window for Middlesbrough.